Thank you, Janet. Thanks everybody for joining me today. I'm really pleased to be presenting Guiding Your Clients Through Disappointment today. One of the people who helped me with this was Brandon Leach. He's a family counselor up in Sharbot Lake, Ontario. So why am I doing this? So basically, I had a lot of clients who would go to an interview, we would get prepped for the interview, and they would maybe not get the job. And then I wouldn't hear from them. They wouldn't respond to my phone calls. They wouldn't respond to my emails. And what was happening was I was getting frustrated, or when they did come in, I wouldn't address the elephant in the room. It was just a little uncomfortable. So I was at a meeting one day with a counselor, and I asked him if he could help me with how I would help them when they feel disappointed or disillusioned. And he gave me a whole bunch of tools, and I said to him, Brandon, do you mind if I put this in a webinar? And he said, sure. So we collaborated a little bit, and this is what I came up with. I thought that that you all might be interested in this. So I do want to preface this webinar by saying that we are not counselors. We are cheerleaders, we are coaches, but it does help to understand the reason for their behaviors and to have the ability to offer effective next steps towards success. Disappointment. Let's take a look at disappointment. I know you all know what it means is that it's the feeling of sadness or displeasure caused by the non-fulfillment of one's hopes or expectations. What happens when we're disappointed by the outcomes of our actions, though? It may cause a lot of stress, disenchantment, disillusionment, displeasure, and the antonym for that would be satisfaction. So obviously, we're not satisfied with the behavior that we're feeling. So when we do feel stress, we get that fight or flight response. At a certain point of stress, your brain switches off and your fight or flight response kicks in. And this can be true for emotional events as well as physical. And that's a proven fact. So we do tend to revert to our learned behavior. Just like we avoid touching the stove because we could burn ourselves, we avoid topics or situations that hurt. If your client may be sitting at home dreading the idea of telling you that why they didn't get the job, or that they had done something wrong during the interview, they may not be responding to your attempts to reach them. Or whenever you come in, whenever they do come in to see you, you may find it hard to bring that topic up. The other thing that we want to take a look at and something to think about is that this event may just be the tip of the iceberg, because job loss can spark other issues in clients' lives. Marital issues, they may have been having problems even before this happened, and now it's getting even worse because they're at home and feeling bad about themselves. They're going to increase debt. There may be sleep deprivation, emotional trauma. There's also grief and anxiety if they've been working in that field for a while, and anxiety over what their next steps are going to be. So it can be very overwhelming for our clients, and it's important to remember that. So what ends up happening is we kick in with coping mechanisms. We all have them. What are your coping mechanisms when you think about them? Everybody has certain coping mechanisms. Some people need to psych talk themselves into doing an interview. Some people avoid things. Some people, and we all have ways of overcoming these coping mechanisms. But some of the more negative coping mechanisms, we're going to look at those here. So self-sabotage. And it is understandable that some people do self-sabotage. They're almost at the precipice of getting a job when they've been off for a long period of time, or something that's new to them, and they sabotage it. They don't go to the interview, or they're late for the interview. It's easier to stay miserable and familiar than it is to risk change. It's why people stay in abusive relationships, why they don't want to change the situations that they're in, even if that situation isn't good for them. So let's take a look at why someone could self-sabotage. So with some of the clients that we see in employment service, some of them may have grown up in a family on social assistance, and this creates a never-ending cycle of dependence. They may worry that the entire family can lose their safety net, like OW benefits, medical and dental. And there's also the belief that they would have never made it anyways, especially if they're stepping out of the norm of what their family has done. Avoidance. So can anybody raise their hand and tell me who avoids situations that they don't want to be in? All of us. The answer is all of us. We really do have to try to psych talk ourselves into doing things that we don't want to do. Has anybody ever asked you, how do I look in this dress, or how do I look in this suit? And you don't want to have to necessarily tell them that that something might be better, and so you have to challenge yourself to say it in a positive way. Telling somebody that something that they don't want to hear is a hard thing to do, and not everybody has the coping mechanisms to get over that. So avoidance is coping and refers to choosing your behavior based on trying to avoid or escape particular thoughts or feeling. So they may see your phone number come up on their screen and decide that they just can't handle talking to you today. They just can't handle telling you that they didn't get the job. Projection. Projection is an unconscious self-defense mechanism where you blame everybody else. And you can see down at the bottom of the screen, I could tell that the lady interviewed me, that interviewed me didn't like me right away. I never even had a chance. It's so much easier to blame it on somebody else than to make it your fault. And sometimes it's nobody's fault, and they can't even recognize that there was just another person who was a better candidate. But even blaming somebody else is easier than realizing that there may be just somebody else. So they get into this vicious cycle of disappointment, where they're blaming, and they're feeling bad about themselves, and they're feeling like as if they get self-defeating thoughts. So why bother? And it's our job to break the cycle and help them to get the job. Let's try get them looking forward instead of looking backwards. But what if they won't return your calls? Well, if you can leave messages on their answer machines, or you can send them emails, here are some ways that you can rephrase or refocus things so that when they think about getting back to you, they think of it in a positive manner. Hi there. I wanted to tell you about an interesting workshop coming up that I thought you might find interesting. And you can tell them that that would be great to have on their resume going forward, give them something to look forward to. I know things didn't go the way you would have liked them to at the interview, but that's okay. I've got lots of tools to help you ace your next interview. I look forward to hearing from you. So just being able to tell them that, you know, we do have the tools to help them with the interviews, that would help them be a little less nervous the next time going into it, because it really, really does take a lot of self-esteem, even at our level, to go to an interview, because you risk rejection. We have jobs on our job board that I know you would be well suited to. I hope to see you soon so we can discuss these new opportunities. So just being able to phrase them in a positive light can help make the person feel that that contacting you will be a positive thing. If you do get the opportunity to talk to them, it's important to ask teaching questions. So maybe the interview didn't go as well as you had hoped, and then you can ask them questions about why they felt that way. So were you on time? Yes, I was on time. Were you dressed appropriately? And if their answer is yes to everything, with regards to being dressed appropriately, being on time, being prepared, did they ask you the questions that we went over in the mock interview? Did you understand the position? Then we can, based on what they answer, whether it's, you know, I completely blanked out on the questions that we went over in the mock interview, and I had no idea what to say. Okay, well, let's go over them again, and you know, practice makes perfect. Or I got there late to the interview. Then you might ask them why. We went over, you know, the route to take there. We went over how early you should be. And then being able to give them the tools to look forward. Okay, you can't change the interview, but you can learn from it. If you could change anything from the interview, what would you change? How would you do things differently going forward? So you're taking the focus, you're sort of in the throes of bringing the conversation from the past into the forward, okay? And being able to have them looking forward. And learning from, now here's where they're learning from whatever mistakes they've made, or going forward how they could do it better. So there are 3 R's of resiliency, and the first one is reflect. Throw back what they're saying. Let them know you're listening and understanding. Help them realize that what they're saying and feeling are understood. I understand that you really wanted that job, and you're telling me that you're upset that you didn't get it. You don't have to qualify it. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is reflect on it and tell them that you understand, that you hear what they're saying. The next one is reframing it. Being able to say, okay, this happened. It sucks. But getting the interview meant that you beat out so many other candidates just to get to the interview. Not everybody gets one. Being able to reframe it. You didn't answer those questions as well as you might have liked. Let's be better prepared to answer those questions the next time. Also, letting them know that you understand how hard it was to put themselves out there. Reframing that, perhaps it just meant that you weren't a good fit, that there was somebody else that was a better fit. And if that's the case, would they even want the job? The next one is refocus. Again, this is helping them look forward again. It's important to be prepared for the meeting, suggest upcoming workshops, a future appointment, work on specific items, or other job leads. Maybe we could take a look at your resume and rewrite your resume in a functional resume or a different type of resume. Let's look at getting you a portfolio if that's the case. So resiliency, the entire point about resiliency isn't about never being disappointed. It's about the ability to bounce back. And this is where our being a cheerleader can really help those who have a hard time doing it on their own. That's how we can help them. But, success is built on disappointment, and disappointment is inherent in all success. So closing notes, prepare a list of resources for free local help and offer to put them in touch with a counselor if coaching isn't sufficient. Sometimes there may be some underlying mental health issues that we are not prepared to cope with, and that's not our job as employment consultants. So being able to have the card of a local counselor and being able to refer them is a great idea if this is getting worse, or if some addictions is starting to come out because of the disappointment. You can also have a list of other jobs that they could apply to and give them something to look forward to. It also helps sometimes to speak from personal experience. Let them know that they're not the only ones who've experienced disappointment, and be their cheerleader. Let them know that you believe that they can achieve their goals and they can learn from their experience. And that's my webinar today. Does anybody have any questions?
Sorry, I'm just talking to myself. I was on mute. That's great, Leslie. That's a lot of good information. But I think a lot of the questions that would come up is really dealing with that client who does have the mental health issues and how you steer them towards a support system when they're in denial, right? Don't we find that the ones that probably need the help are the ones that are not prepared to seek it out? Can you hear me, Leslie?
Oh, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Did you hear what I said?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. So I was saying that I think for most of us, the problem would be is steering that client with the mental health issues in the right direction as far as a support system. Because as we know, the ones that probably need the help, that they're in denial.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I always like to tell people that speaking to a counselor can sometimes be like a spa day for your brain. and telling them that when I've recommended people to further counseling, I make sure to tell them that I'm not doing it because I think that that it's a bad thing, that I think that everybody deserves to have somebody who understands how to put their feelings in perspective to speak to. So that's, that is difficult, especially if they don't want to admit to that. And I have seen that. But like with anything else, like with a job, like with a counselor, all we can really do is give them the tools. And they may not do it right away, but they may be sitting at home and talking to a friend or a spouse and say, she gave me this card. And it might be them that says, hey, maybe you should give them a call. Yeah. Because generally, if they do have somebody else in their life as well, then that person knows it as well.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So be prepared for that. Be prepared for that meeting. Make sure that you have all of those resources with you. Mm-hmm. I've even called the counselor myself. Do you mind if we give them a call now and see if they have any space available in the upcoming weeks?
Yeah.
And see if I can make that appointment. It's not always easy, but it is important to let them know that this isn't a negative thing. Mm-hmm. And that everybody deserves to have somebody to talk to that can really put things into perspective for them.
Yes, yeah. So I've got a couple of questions here. So somebody is asking if you can give an example of how you helped a client through a disappointing job search experience and how those strategies worked.
So at the beginning of the webinar, I was talking about how I'd had a client come in and we had prepped for an interview, and I'll just go into it a little bit more. We had prepped for an interview, and the interview was a little bit more it wasn't out of their league, but they thought that it was out of their league. And so we prepped for it. We'd gone through the mock interview. We talked about what to wear, and then the person showed up late for the interview. And it was, traffic's fault, and it was the lights, and it was the car, and it was everybody else's fault. And I just absolutely listened to what they had to say. And then, I really had no idea how to go forward with this person, because I was starting to feel like, you had a great opportunity with this job, and I had spoken with the employer, and the employer was looking forward to meeting them. And it's not like as if they were interviewing a whole bunch of people, but it was really outside of where they wanted to be, which was really only became apparent afterwards. So it was after that meeting that I was at a community services meeting with the counselor that I really felt like as if I was at a loss. And he was like, and I said, can I bend your ear for a second? And he was like, well, perhaps this wasn't what they wanted, and they sabotaged it. Have you thought of that? And I was like, that never even occurred to me, because they're the one who brought me the job lead. So he was the one who sort of gave me, and I hadn't been hearing from them after our original appointment, and because I didn't really know how to go forward, I wasn't pushing it either. So when I came back from that meeting with Brandon, I started emailing him positive, like those positive things. There are all kinds of jobs out there. Let's take a look. Let's refocus. Let's see. Maybe that one wasn't for you, and that's all right. There's so many jobs out there, and we can do this together. You have a team with you. And he came in reluctantly, and we talked about it. I was like, so what do you think went wrong in the interview as well? And he, going through all the steps, realized that it was too much. It was too much outside of his comfort zone. And so I was like, okay, well then that wasn't the job for you anyways. I said, let's look forward, and let's look at other jobs that are out there that you'd be comfortable with. So then that completely changed how we even looked at jobs now, because he was looking for jobs that were outside of his comfort zone. So once we found jobs that were within his comfort zone, it was a lot easier to guide him through the interview process. Other clients that I've had, what's happened is they just can't bear to tell me that they didn't get the job. We do a lot of work towards prepping them for it, and then they feel that somehow that it's their fault. And just always being positive and not really giving up. I put it in my calendar that a couple times a week I make sure to email them, leave them messages. They always try to be upbeat. And it's not 100%. I mean, nothing is 100% ever. But what I do find is, for me, speaking from personal experience with them, really does help being able to say, I've been there, I've been disappointed, and I've been to the point where you think it's all you, and then you realize, wait a minute, there are other tools out there to help me, completely ace my next interview. And sometimes you really just need to be able to give them a little bit of time to lick their wounds as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And they have to learn by their mistakes. I mean, we can't be all things to them. They need to come to the table too,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So a few more questions. So I agree with Leslie's point about saying we are cheerleaders. A lot of clients come into us and the word counselor is thrown at us freely. So offering up front that we are not a counselor is a good first step and can provide resources for them. I say this all the time on so many webinars, so I apologize if I'm saying it to somebody again. But, when I was a counselor, and I remember it was Angela Hoyt said to me, she said, the way you approach these clients, they got to come to the table too. So my philosophy would be to say to them, I will match your effort. So, I'm not going to kill myself if, you're not showing up for the interviews, you're showing up late, you're not prepared. So I think that's a good dialogue to have with the client too. They need to know that this is a win-win, and you both need to be at it at the same time. So another question, I have a client who has an obvious alcohol problem over the last few months. He has been taking an online security course in order to be a security guard. In the last month, his alcohol problem has become so noticeable that going forward to get his security license is no longer an option. How do I approach him with the knowledge that this route is no longer accessible for him?
I'd like to know how do you know that it's absolute that this is no longer, what is the indicator that's telling you that they are no longer able to do this? Is it because they're not doing the courses that they need to do, or have they gotten charges? There must be something that is an elephant in the room, I would think.
In the last month, his alcohol problem has become so noticeable that going forward to get his security license is no longer an option.
Does he come to meetings with alcohol on his breath? Is that what you mean?
I can. This is Michelle. Let me get Michelle.
I'd just like to know how it's noticeable.
Mm-hmm. Let me get the attendance up. I'm going to get Michelle and meet Michelle if I can.
That's a really hard thing to do, because even family members have a hard time.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, are you there?
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Grace. Okay, bye-bye.
Michelle? Michelle?
Hello, yes, I don't have a mic.
Multitasking.
Yeah, I tried to, so we'll leave that one for a minute and see if she comes back. So basically, sure. Michelle, if you would like me to unmute you and ask the question, I can certainly do that in more depth. She's coming back. So basically, Michelle's saying that she's talked to local security companies. You can smell the alcohol. He's shaking. Yeah. So all those indicators that he has an alcohol problem.
So he has been working for security companies, and they're telling you that they don't want him back. Is that right?
No, I think he was taking courses to get ready. So I have a client who has an obvious alcohol problem. Over the last few months, he's been taking an online security course in order to become a security guard. In the last month, his alcohol problem has become so noticeable that going forward to get his security license is no longer an option. How do I approach him with the knowledge that his route is no longer acceptable for him? I think he knows it.
He knows it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he knows it. I even think that asking him questions to let him be the one to say it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with asking him if he really feels that this is the route that he needs to take. You know, I often will say to clients, if you could close your eyes and do anything, take away all the barriers, what would it be?
Yeah.
And sometimes people will say, so let's just say the answer is security guard, and why is that? Why is that? And that may even be him putting up his own barriers. By having something that's unattainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which it is right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But and
That's
then
yeah.
The other side of that too is another thing that I've done is I'll say to them, all right, well, you're working towards your security guard, but you need to work now. So sometimes you have to take the job that you need to get the job that you want. And I frequently say that, that you need to take the job that you need to take, and that gets them out of the house. In these cases, I know that in these cases, when I have paired somebody up who's in a bit of a precarious situation, either they really need a job and they're feeling like they're in a precarious situation. I make sure that the employer that they're going to, I know who the employer is, and I know that they're not a bad employer, because there are some pretty crummy employers out there who can make you feel pretty demoralized. So I'll try to pair them up, even if it's an entry-level position, just to get them out of the house and get them started thinking forward. But I have done that before too. And volunteer experience really does, it gets you out of your own problems, and realizing that, whether you're walking dogs at the Humane Society or changing the blankets and the cat crates at the Humane Society, or you're going into the Cancer Society and licking envelopes, or at the hospital, there's all kinds of ways that you can volunteer. And so if he's running into problems and this isn't working, then you could say, well, while you're working on this, let's get you out volunteering, because that's going to get your name out there. That's going to get you out there networking with people who are in the job. And that really does help people to realize that, hey, as bad as my problems are, there are others who have it worse.
Yeah, for sure. So this is,
and that's a common thing among rehabilitation, like alcohol rehabilitation, AA. They do recommend that people who are recovering, that they volunteer. It just gets you outside of your circle.
Yeah, keeps you somewhat busy. So this one comes up, and if you have an answer for this one, it comes up all the time. So always looking for suggestions to motivate clients on OW. As stated, it's sometimes a cycle for individuals whose parents were on OW, and sisters and brothers, etc. But sometimes I struggle to motivate the ones who want to break from the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any suggestions?
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It really is, because quite frankly, even the parents aren't motivating. I don't know why you're doing that when you can get a check on your own. You've got a free. I did it. Your grandma did it. And it's like OW, ODSP, Children's Aid. They're generational on these systems, and it really, really is difficult, because that's quite frankly, that's. When I talked about self-sabotage, that's a classic case of self-sabotage, because people almost, and that was the classic case with this guy too. He had the education, he went through the education of getting something, but when it actually came time to working outside of anything that he, you know, it was a higher paying job, and I think that all of it just completely overwhelmed him. Like he felt like as if he just was not worthy, frankly, of that much money and that much responsibility, and completely sabotaged it. And we see that. And so I really do believe that with OW, it's baby steps. It's all baby steps. It's part-time. You know, they can work so many hours part-time without it even affecting OW, and being able to have their OW caseworker reiterate that, yeah, you can make up to $125 a week, and we won't cut that out of your check. Getting them outside, and then once they get outside and people are complimenting them on their work, and you're championing them and letting them know that you're right behind them and you're here if you need them, that your job doesn't end once they get a job if they need to call you. That's a huge, I tell every client that I've ever gotten a job, my job doesn't end now. I want to know if you're having problems. I want to know if you're feeling overwhelmed, and I can help you. It really is important, and I only very rarely do I actually have somebody, you know, take me up on it, but I've never had anybody who has taken advantage of it, because usually once they get out there in the workforce, they like how it feels. They like that feeling of self-respect. They like that paycheck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so many jobs out there right now, that it's, you know, even though they're only working this many hours, after a while, the bosses, you know, especially if they're good at what they do, they will ask them to work more, and it will eventually get them off that cycle of, but again, you know, this is where really, when people are in a precarious situation, putting them with any employer is not going to work, especially those employers that frequently come to you looking for more employees because they lose them all the time. Knowing who your employers are, and knowing who the better ones are, and the ones who seem to be a little bit more respectful of the people who work for them, that's the key when somebody's in a precarious situation like that. If somebody's feeling self-esteem, that their self-esteem is, then putting them with those employers who treat their employees not very well, and who are frequently coming to employment service to replace the ones that they have pushed out the door, they're not the ones that you want, because that's just going to send your client on a downward spiral. Mm-hmm.
And they don't need any more disappointments. You're right.
That's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Janet.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I don't see there's any more questions. So we'll just give it one more minute. But that's great information. I want to thank you, Leslie, for this webinar.